Woodoo, 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 Woodoo.
This is it. The podcast has begun. Welcome everybody to the third episode of the Woodoo podcast. I'm here with Amelia, otherwise known as Vadona Volva. How's it going?
I'm good, thank you. And you?
Yeah, I'm good. So we wanted to speak about transcendence in the spiritual fields and how there's this kind of attitude of people wanting to transcend their human needs and transcend their limitations rather than embrace them and, get in touch with them.
Yeah, it always reminds me of the story of the Buddha and how people, like in the New Age community, in the New Age movement, there are so many reference points and teachers of the last century and the last decades and so on. But we kind of forget about the old teachings, and of course they've been mistranslated in horrific ways and misinterpreted. And I've had the privilege of studying them a little bit in university, so I have a specific point of view on that. And a lot of people forget the fact that Buddha was born a prince. Buddha had all of his needs met. He was well fed, he was well clothed, he had a family. I think he even had a wife before he abandoned
I think he had a wife and kids.
Prince life. So all of his needs were met before he went into the awakening path. And this is not to say that a person that hasn't... Yeah, I think so. He had a whole family, he had responsibilities and so on, and he abandoned them all. He was able to abandon them all because he had them. So imagine if Buddha was born poor, he had nothing, he wasn't well, he wasn't well fed, he hadn't clothes and so on. He wouldn't be able to renounce that all and go on his first path, which was the path of renouncing and the path of, asceticism and depriving oneself of everything that's material. Of course, that was just a phase, but it was an important phase because he realized that wasn't it. But if he was poor, and anyone can understand it, if he was born poor and if he had gone to that path, like that would have been self-neglect. It was self-neglect, of course, but he was able to renounce that all because he had it and he knew he could have it. But if you go straight from being poor and having nothing and not being able to sustain oneself and not having connections, especially, to I want to transcend human life and human experience and material life and transcend it all, and I don't need that.
Yeah.
That's, of course, a coping mechanism because you believe that you can't have it. You can renounce all of that stuff. If you had it, you can't renounce all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
Didn't have it.
I find myself, as I'm exploring spirituality and as I'm really testing what works and what doesn't work, is all of these teachings of be in the present moment, just sit with things and just yada yada, and it's all this very passive stuff. And I'm not saying that some of it isn't beneficial, but I'm finding how underrepresented go and do it is. Go forward, move forward. And I know that there are other areas of the internet, like the self-help areas, which they overemphasize that stuff, and they perhaps don't have the other side of just being present with things and such. But it at least in the spiritual field, there's a great imbalance, and I'm finding how much more happy and alive I feel when I actually allow myself to move forward and find what direction feels right to move forward. I think that presence and sitting with things and that passive state is so good to be able to stop and gain a sense and think, okay, where do I want to move forward? But actually, the more and more I move forward, the happier I am in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, especially getting your needs met. Like, of course, forward movement is masculine energy. So what's also important that I want to note on is that spirituality for men and spirituality for women, they look kind of different, because women and men have different needs. They have different energies. Masculine and feminine are absolute polarities in the universe, and they preceded human experience and even life on Earth millions or billions or, absolute terms of time. So it's important to recognize even that part of it. It reminds me of The Power of Now of Eckhart Tolle, when he was saying that for men it's more important to be disidentified from the mind, because men are very identified in the mind, and for women it's more important to disidentify from the body of pain.
That's interesting. That's really interesting.
And a lot of people seem to be like, oh no, you have to see the absolutes of human existence. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Like even Eckhart Tolle, which is so for disidentification and looking at the mind and using the mind, not letting the mind use you and so on. He was like, the path for women is different. The priority for women is to disidentify from the body of pain, because women, also when they menstruate, the body of pain becomes activated, and that's once a month. It's often. So
yeah, I remember him saying about that, actually.
For a man, it's forward movement. That's for men, it's forward movement. That's an absolute of masculine energy. And of course, we all do have masculine and feminine energy into ourselves. But for women, feminine energy is receptive. So how are you receptive to the world? And of course, we all do have our polarities, but it's very important in terms of not transcending, but meeting needs and being able to have what you have. It's also important to know how to be what you are, how to be, and be able to exalt what you are in the most exalted form, in the most absolute and ultimate form of what you are, instead of transcending the physical experience and getting the fifth dimension, which is fucking fluff, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's what saddens me so much, is how far we've moved away from the reality of human life. And I have a theory, and maybe other people have said a similar thing, but my thoughts is since the internet, or not even since the internet, since the world became more interconnected, since television, and since it was possible to access information from various parts of the world, there's become this situation where there's being a kind of melting pot of different spiritualities from around the world. So we have Hinduism, and we have Buddhism, and we have Christianity, and we have Western philosophy, like European philosophy, and we have the Greek philosophies, and then the old gods, and just all of these things, and then the chakra systems, and then the energies, and all of these things poured in together and mixed in this sort of indiscriminate way. And it creates this kind of hazy soup of potential, but it hasn't been brought together. It hasn't been synthesized. And it's my belief, and I've said this before, that the people who will be successful in the next 20 to 30 years are not the people who know information, but the people who can synthesize information and take that information and create it into something that is stripped back but useful, and they know what to keep and what to chuck. And I think that's so important. And I think most spiritual people on the early part of their path, what I see in these people is this kind of hyper overloading of the nervous system with spiritual concepts. And I propose to those people to really test them, to really push these ideas out into the world, test them and see if they work, because it only matters if it works. And I think people's lives sometimes are so messed up as well that they find it hard to even realize what is and what isn't working, which is a kind of a sad situation. And it's only as I've kind of struggled through and slowly bit by bit improved my life that I can really throw a spiritual practice into my life and kind of see whether it holds water. And it's a kind of a messy situation, but I think as we have more people who are better at synthesizing information and then expressing to the world what they've synthesized, and then having people realize, oh my God, this is really good, it's actually working, I think we'll take this kind of migraine of information migraine of spiritual information that is in the world and kind of strip it back into something where we have a new system that genuinely enriches people's lives again.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it reminds me of that episode from the Midnight Gospel. Do you remember that? Have you seen that?
Which one? I've seen all of them. Yeah.
And the one about magic. With Damien Eccles, where he was saying, you know, all of these Western people doing meditation and Zen meditation for years, and they know nothing about like Eastern culture, the cultural practices and the context of those practices, because of course you can't abstract, you know, an entire religion out of its context and its culture and what it means for people and how they live it. You know, because meditation, of course, it's a beautiful tool, but you have to understand where it comes from. And that was genius what he said. He said, I've done magic for more, like less time that I've done this kind of meditation, and it gave me more results than years of meditation. Months of magic have given me more results than years of meditation, because that's your culture, that's where you come from.
And the Western mind is very different.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
So different.
We have different priorities. We have a different culture.
It's crazy. And even,
we have different values.
Even in myself, I'm realizing this principle of, and I was just talking to this before the podcast, of in my YouTube videos and things that I do, where it's me talking to the camera, I feel so insufficient. Because I have good ideas, but the real meat of what I have to offer is in relationship to other people. And I think it's the things that we have to relate our spirituality to ourselves rather than have this thing in isolation. And when I'm speaking to the camera, I feel like I'm not relating to anything. It's just my preconceived notions being expressed into the void. And the meat of life, the strength of life is in a relationship between two or more things. So when I've done workshops and I speak to a group of people and I can feel out the group of people and I ask questions, it's great. I love the information that comes through, but because it's in relationship to somebody else. And that's why I'm prioritizing doing these podcasts now, because it's nice. I can flow from a person. And my ideas are always updating and growing to be able to relate better. So if I just post my ideas out, it's like this probably will be out of date sometime. But when two people relate together, you've related together. That's real, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's the difference between spirituality as a coping mechanism and spirituality as a way of enriching and bettering your life. I think it all starts as a kind of coping mechanism because you don't get to spirituality if you're not fucking miserable, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Like, you refer to God and to the universe when you have no one else to refer to and no one else seems to help you.
Yeah.
That's the truth. So, I think it all starts as a coping mechanism for everyone, but it gets to a point, and you're like, yeah, I feel better, but has my life improved? No. So spirituality it's an enormous tool. It's a big part of life. It's beautiful and it's enriching and it's amazing, honestly. But it's got to be used in a conscious way, It helps you to become conscious to the point where you're conscious of why you're using spirituality. It's kind of ironic.
And I think it's nice when people have really spent a lot of time with spirituality. Hopefully, they kind of have this thing where they start off in their real life and they're miserable. They escape away from their real life with spirituality. They learn a few things and hopefully they learn enough to point them back to their life. But now they've learned enough that they can re-engage their life with a newfound strength. Now, hopefully more people will be able to get into spirituality without using it as a coping mechanism, and there won't have to be that phase of escaping life. But it's quite common for most people, even people who've really got their shit together in spirituality, to have had this phase where they like, la-di-da-di-da, I'm going to disappear off with the fairies.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of natural to have that period. What's worrying me when it becomes chronic and people have become like stable in that kind of way.
Yeah.
And it worries me because it means that you're disconnected from yourself. You're not using spirituality to become more sensitive and more sensible and to feel more. Because if you were doing that, you would feel the loneliness, you will feel the disconnection from other people, from your life, from yourself, and it's really, really saddens me when I see people being like, oh, I've done lots of Reiki, I've read tons of books, I know all of this and all of that, but like they put nothing into practice and their life does not fucking change.
Absolutely. Yeah,
and they do nothing to change the world around them. That's what makes me the most mad.
They cope. It's like, oh my God, something bad is happening to my next door neighbor. I will pray for them. I'm like, why don't you call the police? you know, and it's sad. I think I saw I was very aware of this and this tendency in these types of people, but when I went to Glastonbury, oh my God. And what's sad is you see 60-year-old people who've been into this for maybe 40 years and they're still in this phase of denying reality. And I particularly remember going on a walk with my girlfriend at the time, and there was this little group of sort of 60s to 70-year-old hippies wearing all tie-dye and, the whole look at me, I'm alternative look, like with big staffs walking. And I don't dress like a hippie. I dress the way I want to dress, which is sleek and dark, and I just like that. I find it an expression of my soul, which is, I think, more spiritual than, look at me, I wear tie-dye, so I'm a hippie. Anyway, so I was wearing that, and my girlfriend at the time was wearing, normal-ish clothes. And me and her were just laughing. We're just having a nice time and just goofing off about something. And they gave us all this look of like, oh, our spiritual Glastonbury is being invaded by these normal people. And we were both spiritual nutters and probably, like, you know, figured things out. Well,
Oh my God.
I feel like we'd figure things out more than they had anyway. And I was like, we're one of you, for fuck's sake. And you're glaring at us because you're judging us because you think that we're not spiritual enough. And I find that so incredibly amusing and sort of saddening.
It's such a red flag. It's such a red flag when in your spiritual path you feel superior to other people because you're spiritual. Like, that's such a trap. That's such an ego trap. Like,
Oh yeah.
you feel superior because you've transcended your ego. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. God
Not
damn
at
it.
all. This is another thing. Let's talk about transcending your ego. Okay? So, since studying a lot of, and I haven't studied a lot of Carl Jung or Freud or Adler directly, I study them secondhand through people who've taken their time to synthesize that stuff and explain it in a way that isn't based in the culture that it came from, which is, you know, it's like 100 years ago. It was old, it's outdated. So, you know, you might call me a heathen, but I think the information I've gleaned from it is very useful. But anyway, from what I can tell is when you look at the ego from the standpoint of Western psychology, it's like, yeah, this is a normal part of your being. This is like a function. It's like if everyone had a problem with their head. It's like if people said, oh, the monkey mind, that's why you've got to get an axe and chop your head off, you know? And then some people manage to do that, and then they're dead. And it's the same thing with the ego. The ego is a function of your natural homeostasis. Your ego is it's like a ship in the ocean of your consciousness. You need that. It's essential. It's not a removable thing. And it's limited, and it has its limitations. But it's the same way that a computer screen has limitations as compared to the raw binary of what's going on inside. But at the same time, how the fuck are you going to interface with the computer if you don't have a screen? Oh, do you want to just like be on like the fucking Matrix where there's just like binary on the computer and it's like, yes, now I've moved past this stupid screen thing. I can just see the raw binary. And I'm like, yeah, but there's no point because the screen is an interface for the thing which is overly complicated. Because the ego is what relates to your unconscious. And your unconscious is vast. Your unconscious is doing 1,000 things and more at the same time right now. It's aware of its cultural programming. It's aware of the sounds of the around you, the ambient sounds. It's aware of the other people. It's aware of how it's going to come across to people. It's aware of so many things. And you can't live like that. You need to have an ego that can say, what do I want for lunch? I think I want a cheese sandwich. You know, rather than like 1,000 different voices from within you offering 1,000 different suggestions and nothing ever gets done. The ego is what pulls it all together. The ego is what makes you be able to, you know, not be having an acid trip 24/7.
Okay, wait a second, because I think that we both have different definitions of ego. Okay. Because on a side note, ego is not even a word that Buddha would say. Ego was invented by Freud. Yeah. But for me, ego, my own definition of ego is just your own sense of self, your self-concept. So how you define yourself. I am Emilia. I am 25 years old. I am blah, 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 blah. You know, that's part of the ego. That's your self-concept. That's who you are. And that's how I define ego. What you were talking about, like the ego perceives the sounds and so on, that I would call consciousness, to be like from my own point of view, you know. Yeah,
well, that's the problem with these conversations is we talk about a word as as inflated as ego or consciousness. And there's so many different angles that people have had that we all have slightly different definitions. So the self-concept I think that's a good way to differentiate. So there's the self-conscious, the self-concept, and there's this awareness, the limited consciousness awareness. That's the part, when they say we have the ability to consciously hold 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information at once. Have you heard that?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what we would be calling the conscious awareness right now. And then there is the self-concept, which contains everything that we know of ourselves, which I think is also a part of how we relate to our unconscious. Because the self-conscious is something that the consciousness refers to itself to check itself, And that's when it's interesting when somebody...
If you think about beliefs...
you go now.
Yeah. if you think about... if you think about beliefs, subconscious beliefs, for example, let's say I was tackling this belief into myself some couple of days ago. Like, I have this deep-seated belief that I am a failure. So I am a failure is a part of my self-concept. And of course, because it's a limiting belief, which many people, if not the vast majority of people have these limiting beliefs. Those beliefs are part of the self-concept. When we talk about transcending, or rather integrating the ego, we're talking about having a healthy, positive sense of self.
Yes.
Like, you can think of yourself in reality, and you can think of yourself in a positive, compassionate way. That means having integrated the ego. I think that in reference to what you were talking about, transcending the ego, some people want to go straight from having a shit self-concept. So I am a failure, I am shit, I cannot succeed at life, and everyone hates me. I will be alone forever. These are very common beliefs and part of your self-concept too. I am everything and I can see everything because I am one. That means transcending the ego, of course, because you've transcended your sense of self. You do not perceive yourself as to be only yourself. You perceive yourself as to be everything, which is what we would call enlightenment, I think. So I think that's the bypassing, like going straight from I am shit to I am everything before having integrated a healthy, positive sense of self where you can think of yourself as positive. If you do not do that, you're the poor person who goes and throws themselves into a bin and starves themselves in the name of transcendence, which was what the Buddha was trying to do.
And I think
beginning.
From when I listen to these people who've had more of these direct transcendent experiences, I've had a lot of experience in waking consciousness, connecting inwardly through sensation and other methods of this transcendent stuff. But from, if I'm just reciting what I've heard from a lot of people who've, astral projected and stuff, this impersonal realm of consciousness, this impersonal realm of everything is one, yada yada, the desire of that realm is to experience individualness. So all these people on earth are trying to negate what they desired when they were that impersonal thing. And my understanding is that when we go back, it's like that we go back to the ocean and we're just a cup with a piece of water in from the ocean and we get poured back in. I mean, there's more complexity to it than that. But it's like the universe has worked so hard to create this individual experience Why do we think that the point is to negate that? Why do we think the point is to turn against ourselves? You know, it seems
that's
sad.
so crazy.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. Like if you really think that the universe is intelligent and it has a consciousness, why would you ever think that the point of it is to transcend it all and to get to the fifth dimension? Like, I think that's absolutely crazy. Like, you know, if life has a purpose, it's not to transcend it, God damn it.
Exactly.
It's to enrich it. It's to get to the absolute best version of yourself that you can be and create the most beautiful art on this universe. And art can be anything from an experience, from creating your life.
It would be kind of like
it's
it would be kind of like if I picked up a video game, I sat playing the video game, and then the character like turns around and says, well, of course none of this is real. I'm like, I know it's not real. I still want to play though. Yeah, but maybe we should like transcend and go back to your reality. I'm like, I'm familiar with my reality. I'm comfortable with my reality. But I just wanted to have this experience of just being in your reality. Yeah, well, maybe if we like meditate on this game, then maybe I can transcend out of this game. I'm like, no, I can turn you off anytime I want, but I want to have this experience. And that's what it's like, is these people just trying to quit being human. And I'm just like, and I also think in another way, now this is getting a bit more, this is kind of slightly moving into a different topic, but in a sense, giving up yourself to another person and giving up your belief and giving up your life to another person is, I think, another way of quitting being alive, quitting life. Because I think part of the game of life, which is so exciting, is we have this inner drive and we want to put our creativity out into the world. And I think a lot of people give themselves up, whether it's to the culture or to somebody influential or to a myriad of different things, or to a job that then their heart isn't really in. And I find that also very sad, to see people who have this heart that is filled with things, they want to create something in life, and then they just kind of stagnate and get swept up into something else. So that's moving on to a slightly different topic, but yeah.
No, it makes sense, because it saddens me when people aren't reflective enough, especially in the field of spirituality and self-help, which should be, you know, the realm of being reflective and thinking and asking questions, when they don't see how cultural beliefs and values that have been passed on to them, like the concept of self-sacrificing and devoting yourself to something other than yourself and out of yourself, that is not your own happiness, you know, when they transport it to spirituality thinking that it's truth. My own rule, for example, my own rule for myself is that when I see something into spirituality or my own practice that I recognize as a belief or a value passed me down from a previous generation, I know that's false. I know that's not true. Of course, there are stuff that are part of our legacy, but I would say ancient legacy, you know, the ancients and the pagans and all of the people that came before us that weren't like, you know, our grandparents and stuff like that. There are things that are valuable, but certain things that we live actively today, like the value of self-sacrifice, that doesn't benefit anyone but the people that you sacrifice yourself to.
And it doesn't even benefit them properly in the long term. I've had loads of people that have done more harm to me through their self-sacrifice than they've done through their self-centeredness.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Of course, you know, mothers who self-sacrifice for their children just harm them.
Yeah.
That's
It
the more,
it
the
messes
trope of it.
it messes your own internal guidance system up,
Yeah.
and it makes you feel bad for choosing what feels right inwardly for you. I notice myself coming up and think, am I a bad person for trusting my heart, and doing what feels right for me right now? And it kind of, that keeps coming up for me, right? There's something I'm processing through because I was taught so heavily self-sacrifice, and I couldn't do it. That was the thing, is I think some people, because they have a drive to help other people, and I think that's the twist with mothers, is they do have a strong drive to pour themselves into somebody else, to support somebody else. It's part of their instincts, which is amazing. But then they sort of bulldoze themselves and their own needs. And then so when you're like me right now, like a 25-year-old male, and my instincts are saying, get out in the world, you can contribute to the world, but it's about me right now. And I think that's okay for it to be about you. I'm 25, for fuck's sake. I'm not at the phase of my life where it's time for me to like stop and like contribute and really think about everything and settle down. I'm just like, what? No. This is the time for me to develop myself.
Experience life, yes.
Yeah. So that
get to know what is your truth.
Yeah. So that in 15, 20, 30 years from now, if I, when I've developed myself, I can really start giving back, and that will be the place that I'm in. But I'm just not in that place. And why is it such a bad thing to have a phase of your life where yourself is prioritized?
Yeah.
Sad.
It is sad. I envy a little bit Americans, because I think that they're more at peace with that, being so selfish as they are. Maybe us in Europe aren't that, we're not used to being so selfish in a certain way, but healthily selfish, where you really think about yourself. And maybe only people that go into university or in another city, but yet still, they've got all of this programming. I know I did, to be good and to do it for the family, and because your parents want you to do it, and you don't really have time to really live the city or to live the student life, and to be young, be young and without your parents around. And if you want to invite a girl in your dorm and in your room, you can do it.
Yeah.
Jesus, that's something that everybody should experience.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
Once in their life.
Absolutely. And I think it's always sad when you've kind of developed yourself enough that you have a self-acceptance for that selfishness. And then you see other people who are totally wrapped up in a sort of malignant self-sacrificing. And they're like... And I find what's strange is when I try to develop friendships with people who have this deep self-sacrificing thing going on, because I'm such an authentic person who wants to build off of truth, and they're trying to somehow help me by self-sacrificing, and I have to have these conversations. I'm like, this is doing nothing for me. Mm-hmm. You're trying to help me, but actually this is a barrier to our connection. And I understand why you have it, but it's not helping.
So why do you think, and how would you explain why a person self-sacrificing to another person isn't doing them good?
Okay. Well, first off, I'll start why it sort of does good in a certain circumstance, aka the place where that coping mechanism was birthed, like your family or an environment that sort of asks for that. And it's because in that environment, essentially what people are asking for is this scenario where they say, I'll take a bit of pain and you take a bit of pain, and then together we'll have an even share of pain, and then we won't have to really change anything. So when people find it uncomfortable to make big, bold changes in their life, or they're afraid, or they don't realize that they can make big, bold changes, they often settle on this incompatible sort of self-sacrificing where they suffer for each other. But in healthy friendships, what you learn to do is, though I think the capacity to self-sacrifice in the very short term might sometimes help to smooth out bumps in a relationship. If somebody says, "Oh my God, I just broke my leg," will you carry me to the hospital or whatever? I don't really want to carry you to the hospital right now, but I'm willing to slightly self-sacrifice in this moment. Do you know what I mean? In the short term, I think it's not really that much of a problem. But what it does in the long term, when it becomes chronic, what it does is it blocks authentic connection, and it blocks this heart-to-heart connection where both of your needs are getting met. Because the thing about life, especially in the modern world, there's so many options. If you have a friend that likes this but doesn't like this, then that's okay. You talk about the thing that you like, and then you talk with another friend about the other thing, And there's always a way to get your needs met better. The self-sacrificing thing is only when people are stuck together. That's where it really starts, and that's where it really comes from, is a bunch of people are stuck together, and then so they say, here's how we suffer the least together. When there's 4 of you in the family and you don't really meet each other's needs, but they're like, okay, I'll give up this, you give up this, you give up this, you give up this, and then we all collectively suffer the least. But that's not the world we live in. We live in a world where there are opportunities, where we can have more than that. And sometimes even within these smaller systems, like of say 4 people or 2 people or whatever, there's actually ways to work it out, if we're really honest, that do allow for needs to be met directly, even within the same systems. So it's about actually getting your needs met and actually doing things you want to do.
I was thinking about what you said about the example of self-sacrificing in the short term. Me and you are really good friends. We love each other. We have a close friendship. Let's say I broke my leg, and you were like, I don't really want to carry you. But would you really not want to carry me if you saw me suffering? If you have a connection and if you take the other person as a part of yourself, you may have a preference. Okay, I don't want to strain myself physically, but if you really care about someone and if you're really connected, then it's not self-sacrificing because
you're
part
prioritizing
of your well-being.
Yeah.
Yes, because part of your well-being is the other person's well-being.
Yes.
You can't live with yourself knowing that I'm in pain and my leg is broken.
It's true.
You wouldn't be able to just leave me there on the street.
It's going to strain my back. Just scream in pain. Please. This is kind of stressing me out. I think I'm just going to go home. You can shout for help or something and see if somebody else...
I'll just call you an ambulance. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
But we're in the middle of a forest. Meh.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing to remember right now is that our friendship is based upon a lack of self-sacrificing. So I really feel like it would detract me carrying you now. Oh my God.
That's lovely. so yeah, I think that
You think what?
The more connected you are to someone, the less self-sacrificing you feel when you're meeting the other person need. Because if you're connected to someone and you feel their pain on your pain, and you take it as a part of yourself, this is a part of me, and this is as important as it was me, then you're not really sacrificing anything.
Okay, but what about this situation? So
Yes.
you have a friendship that it's in the early phases. You haven't really deeply connected to them, but you're exploring slowly. And then this whole scenario happens and you don't really want to deal with it, but you're like, okay, I think I value this person. I think I value this connection, but I don't yet feel it. It feels a bit like a self-sacrifice, but at the same time, you know, is there an edge case here? I'm curious to see what you think, or do you think it's just?
No, I think it's a good example. I think there could always be a third option. You know, if maybe you don't have that connection with the person per se, but in the extreme case where you are a connected person and you feel connected to everything regardless of the actual level of relationship that you have with the other person, perhaps you would do it, you know, anyways. But if you're not in that case, I think there's always a third option where you can call someone, where you can think of strategies with someone. And I think that would be also kind of natural to not feel the panic of the other person. You know, even like, let's say that you are in a forest and it's not even a friend, you're not in a relationship with this person, but you see a person in need, it's a stranger, would you just ignore them? You know, there's nobody else there that can help them.
Fuck them.
Yeah. No. Wasn't expecting that. You would just let them die. I don't know, it depends on your boundaries, you know, how deeply you feel.
But that's the thing.
care.
That's the thing, is I do think that potentially it can create a buffer. Like, you could really not want to, but at the same time, in those very edge cases, I still think it would probably be best. I'm not sure, but I think what we can agree on at least is if it becomes chronic, if it becomes regular, because most people have a level of self-sacrifice as a sort of social glue that they use to just create ease in situations, even if they're not totally on board with everything. But ideally, so maybe this is it. Maybe rather than thinking like in like a black or white, like should you or shouldn't you, accepting that most people are in a space of self-sacrificing to some degree, and that it's ideal to slowly move away from that and create a healthy selfishness where you do help other people, but you're not turning against yourself to help somebody else. And
absolutely.
The more you can move towards that state, the healthier you will be, and the more effective your impact on the world will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that everyone is to a certain degree self-sacrificing. Like me, I know I do self-sacrifice sometimes. You certainly do. We mostly do it subconsciously, but because of our style of relationship, which is a narcissistic codependent style, we all self-sacrifice to a degree, only because of the fact that we're fragmented. You know, we sacrifice parts of ourselves to be with other people because we're not conscious of them. So part of the path of consciousness and awakening and becoming more conscious of yourself is reowning all of the parts of yourself. And that allows you to self-sacrifice less and less and less, because you become more conscious of what you're sacrificing. And when you prioritize, which is another thing, which is not sacrificing, you are conscious of what you're prioritizing over something else.
Yeah.
You know, it reminds me of like Teal saying, Teal Swan saying about her son, being like, "Oh, my son talks about some stuff. I don't know. He does something that she doesn't like to do, but she knows his deep need to be included and to share something with her. So her priority in that moment is like, I don't really want to do that thing. But if I think of the fact that including him and prioritizing his well-being is a higher priority than my preference, then I'm not sacrificing. I'm not self-sacrificing.
Yeah.
I am prioritizing, which is another thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. It's interesting. So I was going to say about how I've been realizing how important it is to craft your spiritual I'll start again. So I was going to say, I've realized how important it is to craft your spirituality around how you relate to other people and the world around you. And I've been seeing how much the early phases of my spirituality, it was always myself with myself. I was trying to change my energy so I manifest better. I was trying to improve my energy. I was trying to heal my trauma. But actually, the further along I go, the more I realize relationships.
Yes.
Like, forget healing trauma. Work with your relationships, and then when blocks come up in your relationships, then you know what to heal.
Yes.
And you know that it's worked when your relationships improve. Forget manifesting money and sitting there and just praying that money's just going to land, on your lap. You need to learn how to have a quality energy when you relate to other people. And
even with money, it's still your relationship to money.
And relationship
it's still
to money.
A relationship. Yeah,
and
it's still a relationship. Yeah.
And I think people are so traumatized because most people who get into spirituality, the reason that they get sucked up in this whole, it's just me and I'm going to improve me and then I'm going to flow through life on easy mode, which is not true. And I think they get like that though because they've been so let down by people, they've been so hurt by people that they try to, what's the saying, become an island unto themselves. It's just, It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It makes you like a lonely hermit that kind of copes with life.
Yeah, I think we can talk about this, especially because we've gone through that. I remember when we were living together, and now we're gonna heal all of our traumas and do pathwork every single day and dig deep every day to heal everything, and we've got to commit to life and so on. And it just saddens me thinking back at that time and thinking that people are still in that phase, because it's so obvious now that I look back that it stems from an absolute terror of things going bad within relationships. You're like, I want to heal every single one of my trauma, because the hope is for relationships to go good. But you're kind of like going to the middleman. And
I think also in our society, I love that the Western culture respects the individual. I love that whole thing about, our individual liberties, and we're expressing, and the individual is important. I think that's great, but I think one of the potential issues is that when the individual is overemphasized, we miss the context of the individual, which is our relationships.
Yes.
And the relationships is really the web that holds the individual together. And less and less I even think about these things such as my my spiritual energy and my level of trauma and all of these things that relate only to myself. And more I think of my relationship to the world, and I just use that as the measurement of my own inner health.
Yes.
And it
Yeah.
It makes me sad because it's so clear how this whole thing about trying to refine yourself, and it's not just the spiritual field, there's the self-help as well, and it's all about improve yourself.
It's not just that, you know, it's our all like economic culture and business culture and living alone. And you know, I live alone, of course. Like it's not my preference, but I ended up living alone, and it's not something that I love, but there's so many people that just prefer to live alone. And they, like, if they had a choice, you know, live with your best friend or live alone, they would still choose to live alone. And that really fucking saddens me because like culturally, we've put so much pressure on the individual, so much pressure and so much importance on the individual. And I was actually reading an article about atomistic individualism before this podcast, before we called.
Damn.
Yes, it's actually something that stems from philosophy, Locke and other guys, and in the 600s, 700s and so on. And it comes from scientism and the way that like even science works. You know, science works in the sense of everything is atoms, everything can be reduced to their smaller particle. So we can understand the whole by understanding the single fragments and the single components. The problem with that is when it goes into social studies and into social sciences and into our relationships. Because to think of an individual as just an individual, and I'm thinking also of all of the literature around this, especially Italian literature, because of course I'm more expert on that, but all of the questions about how do you know who you are and how can you understand who you are. And what we're not getting is, of course, we have an essence, because we can't deny that, especially in the realm of spirituality. We know we have an essence. We know we have soul, and we know we have our own preferences and so on and so on. But also we're so shaped by our environment and by our relationships. Our own egos are created by the people around us, by the way they mirror us.
And you make
whether we have bad mirroring or no mirroring at all, or positive mirroring.
Absolutely. And you make me think of something that I heard that I really, really liked. And it was about our experience of our parents. And for those of you into sort of healing and looking at trauma and stuff, this may be a really useful tip for you. And the guy said, when your psychology is affected by one of your parents or both of your parents or whatever, and then that affects you internally and that affects how you function as an adult and stuff, remember that when you're looking back at that it's not just your parent and how did that parent treat you, but you actually don't unconsciously separate out your parent from the environment in which your parent was in. And that was a really like light bulb moment for me. So it's when I thought about, you know, it's like my parents, I was like, oh, it was like this and it was like this. And I'm like, but there's something missing here. There's something I'm not getting. But then if I put it in the context of the environment, oh, I was cut off. I didn't have any friends. We were in this big house and there was nobody around and it was isolating. And then it starts to make more sense. And it's true. It's that Western view is to atomize things and look at the fundamental parts. But we so often forget to look at the whole, look at the fabric that is around it and how that shapes the thing itself.
Yes, and it brings us back to what I was saying in the beginning about Buddhism and Eastern philosophies, that you can't abstract the teachings from the context in the same way that you can't abstract a person from their environment, from their family, from their relationships, and from all of the content that they've consumed and all of the people that they've met and that talk to them. It's the same thing. Like, you can't study, let's say, you can't study Julius Caesar without studying the Roman Empire, without studying that age and that time, and understanding what were the views at the time. You can't understand the figure of Julius Caesar without having that fucking context.
And this is one of the things.
And we should do the same with ourselves.
It's one of the things why I love your talking of anthropology, like your study of anthropology and what you know about history, is because you've really taken the time to synthesize that stuff. But one of my weakest points, you said, Harry, you're a smart young lad. You don't seem to know a lot about history, though. And I've always said about history of, I'm interested in the world today. And I understand that history makes a part of that. But history is such a detailed and nuanced thing in itself. I just don't have the space internally to process that. I'm so focused on processing spirituality and processing people. And I'm even very interested in science and biology and things that are in the present, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But I don't have that space within myself to go back and give history the energy that it's due to actually extract something useful from it. And
I'll tell you something that maybe could help you in that. Time is an illusion. So the present moment exists and doesn't exist at the same time. And the past is past and is present at the same time.
Okay, so here's what I mean then. I'm future orientated, and I'm interested in the present as to gain an orientation towards the future. So I'm interested in the past as much as it can inform my future, if that makes sense.
Yes, of course. Like that's the point. That's the whole point of studying history. Like, you study history to know what were the philosophical, the historical contexts, and all of what brought you here. Like, if you have a passion for a certain period, that's fine. You know, that's okay, that's all right. But the main point of studying history is to understand why we got here. Like, let's take let's take a topic that's really talked about right now, like the Russian-Ukraine war. Like, if you don't understand the context, the historical context of why the war is there, you may slip into white or black thinking, like a lot of people are doing, into who's good and who's right and who's bad and who's wrong, which is never the case. Like, of course, there are always victims. Yes. There are always victims, as well as now, as well as in the past. Victimhood is a reality. But if you don't have the historical context of why something is happening, you may as well not talk about it. Yeah. Which is what I am doing, because I'm pretty ignorant at this what is happening. I prefer to listen to other people rather than give my opinion.
Absolutely. I'm just like, I don't know. They would say, oh, it's this and that and that. And I'm just like, this is big. This is big and complicated. Yes. And I don't know enough. And it's nice, because actually I think this war in Ukraine, I've heard that response a lot from people. And I don't usually hear people respond to things like that. And for the first time in my life, there's been something like that, and I've heard a large volume of people just say, I don't really know. Yeah. It's incredible to me, because that's so honest. That's so honest, because what would happen most of the time is something would happen. people would spin an angle on it. There'd be a couple of angles, and everyone would polarize. This bad, this good. Ah! And then we'd fight, and then life would be chaotic and messy. But now everyone's like, wow, this is a really complicated situation. And I'm like, finally, now we can just deal with things bit by bit, you know.
Yes.
Polarization it's no good. It's no good.
Polarization is not good, and overfeeding your nervous system with information about war is not good, and feeling powerless.
Please tell that to my family.
Yeah, God, and feeling powerless about a situation that you can do nothing about, like, is not useful unless you are actually going to do something. Like, if you want to do something, if you want to take in someone, if you want to take in a refugee, if you want to send money, if you want to send food, if you want to do anything at all, you know, you're more than welcome to it. I think it's still important to be aware of what is happening, because it may affect you. But if you're worrying without making a plan, you're just you're just damaging yourself, basically.
Yes,
and I'm really glad. I'm really glad that, like, even in the news here in Switzerland, they're starting to talk about it. You know, they're like, is it good to bombard yourself with so much information about the war? Maybe it's not that good, you know, especially because when you're in fear, you can't do anything. Your parts of your brain completely shut up and you go into freeze. How can you do something that's useful in that fucking state? You can't.
Yep, exactly. And my family, they're very much like, oh, you know, I used to get woken up by them turning the news on and COVID news being blasted through the floorboards. And now I get woken up by Ukraine crisis blasting through the floorboards. And so sometimes I get frustrated with them and I'm like, why? Like, why? And my grandma's like, oh, well, it's good to be prepared for these things. And she's...
Well, if you're not preparing,
but
what are you preparing?
She kind of does. But she's oh yeah, we need to be buying lots of extra grain and stuff, and you know, because I think hard times are coming, and she's maybe a bit different from the norm, because she's one of these Christians who they believe in the end times coming near, and she's like all this stuff, which is obviously very healthy to be around and to have that influence. And I said to her, I was like, look, I focus on strengthening myself, and, you know, if something happens that's unexpected, I'll adapt to it. I said, look, Grandma, if I go out into the garden and I see like a Bengal tiger, it's okay. I'll run. I'll just run in the moment. I'll just figure it out in the moment. But I'm not going to go out into the garden every day preparing for a Bengal tiger to be waiting in ambush for me.
Yeah.
Because that's craziness. Because, so my mum even has stories of when they were kids and my grandma was talking about the imminent end times that were coming. And my grandma's in a freaking, I'm not sure if she's either late 70s or 80s now. And I'm like, come on. At 8, you're still worrying about this stuff at 80 that you were worrying about at, what, 40, 35? I don't know.
I think 30 years after Jesus was dead, they were already preparing for the end of times. You know, it's been 2,000 years.
Oh.
When the Roman Empire fell,
end times.
Everyone was, end times. And they were end times, of course. But like, at the end of something, it means there's a beginning.
And this is the thing that I say to her, is like, yeah, but Grandma, in your freaking book, it says that after the end times, that there's a new Eden and blah 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 blah. So it's all right. We'll just muddle through it, and then hooray! On the other end, it'll be Eden. But it's doom and gloom, and it's preparing for the worst, and it's so weird and sad watching that kind of psychology.
Do you think that's a coping mechanism per se? I think it's a coping mechanism, but I don't understand how that would work.
What, preparing for end times?
Does it allow yourself to like cope by allowing yourself to avoid making your life better in some ways?
I think what it is because of her particular sect of Christianity, which her mother has indoctrinated her since ever. She thinks that the end times is, as she believes it, is reality. Now, it could be a reality on some level, I get that. But she believes it's going to be this atrocious thing. So she's had herself primed for years and years and years to be ready for the end times. So within her is this instinctual fear, and constantly preparing for the end times is a way for her to avoid the depth of terror and fear that she has been programmed to expect, in a way. It's really quite sad.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Okay, I want to ask you and maybe reflect a little bit, getting back to what we were talking in the beginning, like people using spirituality as a way, as a coping mechanism and transcending and so on. Like, why do you think people do that?
I think people feel like they're in a cage, and in some sense are in a cage. And I think if I knew that I was in a cage and I was never going to get out, I'd start fantasizing real quick. And I would imagine that I had superpowers, and I would imagine that going to other galaxies, and I would imagine, I would retreat to essentially my own inner fiction.
Yes.
And I think it is kind of like an inner fiction that people genuinely believe in, like a self-induced psychosis in a way. Like, oh, I can escape and I can do this. And it's not to say that I don't think that these other things and other places are real, but I think it's psychotic thinking that a galaxy far, far away is more important than where my 2 feet are planted right now.
Yeah. It makes me think about my own life. I've grown up as a huge Harry Potter fan. Even before being a Harry Potter fan, I loved Harry Potter because I was already obsessed with magic. And magic has been my source of joy throughout all of my childhood. And I have a magic wand tattooed on me, so it's still a part of my life, and I'm still figuring out how it is a part of my life, but I know it's part of my identity in some ways. And I think the magic is something that people miss in their lives. You have it when you're a child and you love magic and you want that sense of magic and wonder. And people miss that in their lives. And when life becomes dull about paying taxes and taking kids to school and going to work and paying taxes again and, making groceries and so on, like life, like the magic of life is it disappears completely. And it's even a privilege to have that in your childhood. Yet still, people that cope with that in like aliens and magic realms and other dimensions and so on, I think it's a way of taking back that kind of magic that they miss from childhood. That's my own interpretation. Like it stems from my own life, but that kind of, I was thinking about Harry Potter. Harry Potter is magic. There's magic, there's a magic school and so on. But the point of Harry Potter is not really magic. it's the relationships that are there. You know, Harry has a relationship with Hermione and with Ron and Albus and Hagrid and all of these different characters, and they have a depth. And the magic of Harry Potter is actually the relationships that are in there. So
and Voldemort, what is Voldemort? Voldemort is the one that threatens to destroy the relationships between these characters.
Yes, and Voldemort is the ultimate lonely character. You know,
Yes.
I remember myself when I was a kid being very fascinated by evil and by Voldemort himself, and I was wondering, why do people become evil? I can't understand that, you know. And now I understand that it's because of loneliness. You feel so lonely and disconnected and separate and from other people. Of course you want to destroy them.
I really connected to Voldemort. Actually, he's one of my favourite characters. And everyone's like, boo, Voldemort. And I'm like, I fucking love Voldemort. Because his whole story of the being an orphan and then having this desire, and I think it's also the masculine element as well, this will for power. And I think as a male, what happens is when you have a deep sense of neglect, this will for power can rise up above that neglect to try and overcome the neglect you feel.
Yes.
And then when people oppose your power, you feel like, right, well, I better overcome them, because you struggle to relate, I guess. And if you look at, I love the scenes in the films where you see Voldemort with his like little crew, with Voldemort's posse, where everyone sat there very stiff, thinking, am I going to die? Am I going to be killed? What am I going to get from this? Am I safe? And then there's Voldemort walking around, disconnected from everyone, willing to like kill somebody at a moment's notice. And it's the furthest thing from warmth. And it's sad. It's sad. It's sad, and
it's also sad that Rowling didn't really give him justice to the character. You know, she was just like, baddie. He was alone. He's the baddie. He was alone. He was an orphan and yada yada. But actually, he was born bad, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, which is, it should be rewritten by someone more competent.
Yeah, and I think there is some depth. Like there's the whole thing where he was born through the influence of a love potion.
Yeah.
So like he is a creation of manipulation in a way, and he didn't have that love even, you know, through the act itself, if that makes sense. And but I do know what you mean. I always feel like Voldemort gets, you know, I know he does awful things, but yeah, if I was writing it, like, you know, I'd want to kind of add an element of warmth, you know, to or semi-redemption, or, you know, something like that to the character.
Even just, you know, a justification in a certain way, a way to empathize with the character, because Rowling doesn't really give us a way to empathize.
Only when we see
he had a
his
lonely
background.
child.
Yeah, only when we see his like childhood.
Of course, because he's a child. Like, how can you not have compassion for that? But then you see, he had a lonely childhood and he was neglected and so on, and he still didn't do anything and became evil, and you know.
And from my own experience, from the parts of me that kind of relate to Voldemort and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, Voldemort. What it is that you want and what you want to feel is, it's kind of this sensation of maybe I can become so great that people will notice me and give me the acknowledgement that I deserve. It's like he's just like this poor alone kid from this loveless connection in this orphanage, And then he's like, maybe if I become so great, then I will get the acknowledgement of people. And even if it's acknowledgement through fear, at least it's acknowledgement. Better than being overlooked and being isolated and unloved.
True.
Because to
Poor
be
Voldemort.
yeah, to be feared, to be respected because of force, that's more than total isolation. It's not ideal. What is ideal is to be genuinely loved for who you are and appreciated without that force. But that's why people get so desperate.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
And that is also why war is a reality in our world. You know.
But it's also complicated with the whole Voldemort thing as well, because I think sometimes what happens is there is this tendency for some people to overemphasize self-development to cover up a sense of lack, and it never works. And Voldemort is like, he's the most self-developed person, but in a really toxic way. He's like, I'm going to become a freaking immortal, baby. And it's like, damn, that's pretty, you know, and I'm the most powerful. Yeah, like, that's impressive. But it's like an overcompensation in a way. But the problem with like, okay, now we're going to kill Voldemort is actually that self-development is a natural way to work through your trauma. But you just have to integrate it with stuff that he's missed. The self-development is fantastic. If he'd done cool things like that, but then also learned to relate to other people,
yes,
then that would be
exactly.
great.
The relationship bit is what's missing.
Yeah.
You know, self-development, if we want to take all of what we just said into real life, self-development is awesome. You know, when you're looking at your toxic traits, when you look at what things that you're missing, when you want to be the best version that you can be, because that actually allows you to be captivating to other people. You know, that allows you, if you're doing that, you know, authentically, and you're letting yourself be what you really are and the most exalted version of yourself, then that allows you even to have relationships, because people will want to be in a relationship with you. You know, that's part of the attraction of attracting people into your life. But then when you've attracted those people into your life, how do you keep them? You know, that's a question. And that's when being able to relate to other people and being able to have a relationship and to be considerate of the other person and taking and practicing love, taking the other person as a part of yourself. That's all part that's the hardest part actually that comes after self-development. You thought self-development was hard. You know, relationships are even harder.
There is a theory, though, that Voldemort could actually love. He just didn't know how to love for the most part because of, obviously, his situation. And the one character that he actually did love was Nagini, which is quite an interesting theory. Oh, yes. I like that.
I forgot all of the story with Nagini. I thought she was she a girl that he transformed into snake? I completely forgot.
No, she's a girl with a blood curse, which meant that she would turn into a snake, and slowly she couldn't unturn from a snake.
Oh, right.
And then Nagini and Voldemort essentially developed a connection and stuff, and it's theorized that Harry Potter nerd lore. It's theorized that, you know, that they did actually sort of share a mutual love between each other in some form, which I like that idea. You know, Voldemort had a little space in his heart for Nagini and turned her into a Horcrux to keep her safe or something.
Yeah, that's actually sweet. Oh.
My little snake friend, I will sever a part of my soul and jam it in you.
I think we could make a whole, like, podcast series on reflecting on Harry Potter. I should reread it, of course. But, like, you know, I'm thinking about even the symbolism of, you know, of course, Snake and Satan, and that's just, you know, culture. But we know that the shadow animal for the collective consciousness of humanity is the snake. So it's like Voldemort loved all that is dark, you know. Like, no wonder Teal Swan is a Slytherin.
Well, I'm a Slytherin as well.
Slytherin. And me too, so.
And I think that's one of the things is that for myself in my own personal development, is I love really re-owning that.
Yes.
You know, I mean, there's a reason I changed my name to Harry Helsing, because it reflects. So obviously there's Abraham Van Helsing, the vampire hunter, and that represents my willingness. Like, I want to take on the dark things. I want to take on the vampires. I'm happy to do that. Mm-hmm. And Abraham Van Helsing, he also has his tools of the trade, which are very symbolic. He's got silver cross and the crossbow and just all these different things, and the skeleton key and all these different things that have this deep symbology to them, which I love. But also in the name, the Hell Sing, there's a sort of a dichotomy to that, in a way. Mm-hmm. Like, if you think of singing, you think of something very joyful, and then you think of hell, you think of something very, like, an awful place.
Yes.
And I don't know. I think that's why I was synchronistically led to that name. Is this? There's so much encapsulated in that, which I really love, and I really relate to it. And and that, when you re-own that darkness, you become so complete, because it's not owning darkness in this way of. I don't think it's good to sort of like overwhelm yourself. But I do know that by integrating that, I feel whole, and my range, the range of emotions and the range of experiences, and my freedom to express myself is so much more, because I've allowed myself to embrace all the aspects of life that people will see as negative, and all the emotions and instincts within myself that people may judge and say that's bad. I own that within myself, and you don't know the freedom that I feel on the inside compared to 5 years ago. Since doing this, it's incredible, and it's sad because people have not known. Most people haven't known what it's like to be that free, to be that instinctually free, like a dog or a wolf, you know. That is just at one with its instincts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I mean, I'm speaking for myself, and I received this reflection many, many times. So I think it's pretty accurate. A lot of people hate me or they envy me because I'm so free. You know, like today I was walking by the lake and there were ducks, and I had the instinct, go and like run through them and let them like fly, you know. Why shouldn't I do it? You know, I'm free. I'm 25 years old. My parents aren't there to tell me what to do or not do. Like, why the fuck should I do it? You know? And I feel how people are like, oh my God, why is she doing that? And I'm really happy to show them, because I'm like, you know, you can have this too. It's okay to do it. Even if you're 50, it's okay to goof around and to play. And it's fun. And you
it's
can have fun.
That moralizing thing, which is so sad, I think. Because probably what people were thinking is, she shouldn't do that. It's not appropriate, or it's silly, or the poor ducks, or whatever.
Yeah, I know that's what they consciously think, you know. But inside of their gut, they're like, but I would want to be like that too.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and I know that, so I don't care about the judging, and I don't. You know, it's like, I take that into account.
Yeah, of course,
Like,
of course.
Being myself, being the person that I am, I know that's the reaction. But because I'm so pure in what I do, and I'm like, I just want to be an example, you can do this too, it's fine.
And I think that's the thing is people, the negative consequences of life and people's inner moralizer are two totally separate things.
Yeah.
And people seem to overemphasize totally arbitrary negative consequences. Like if you go in public and you dance in the middle of the street, what negative consequences does that have really? Almost
some bad looks.
Yeah, some bad looks. And yet that's the thing that the inner moralizer in everyone is going to prioritize.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do some like scammy like way of earning money where it doesn't really respect people, that's just kind of normalized. Whereas that genuinely has real negative consequences. And that,
God, that's so true.
Yeah, the moralizer within people it's oriented towards, not towards actual positive and negative outcomes. It's oriented towards image. That's really what it's about. It's about image. It's about preservation of image. And that's what winds me up sometimes when people turn to me from a moralizing angle. And I'm like, this isn't about good and bad. This is about image.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so obvious to me why people are like that. When you're a kid and you make a lot of noises and you want to run around and you're embarrassing your parents, it triggers a lot of shame in the parents. But if there are any parents listening out there that are listening to this podcast, like, I just want to encourage you to let your kids be kids. Because there's a time to be an adult and there's a time to be children, to have fun. And the damage that it does to reflect your shame onto your kid long term, it destroys lives. What's the price of feeling a little bit ashamed and embarrassed in front of other people because your kid is being a kid?
Yeah.
People that shame you for that are sad people.
Yeah.
Be sad for them.
I was sitting in the cafe today and I wear like all black, very striking. And I was with my headphones on doing my work. I feel like I was doing something weird, but I can't really remember what. And I saw this like old couple. And I definitely got like a few weird looks. And I was just like, sucks to be you. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm doing my work. I'm having fun here.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm noticing at the moment about myself as I'm reflecting is my tendency to complain. And I think that's something that I want to move beyond that. But at the same time, I'm a big believer in if you feel constantly compelled to do something, then take that seriously, because there's an instinctual reason behind that is important.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I'm always like, go with the flow with the instincts, but at the same time look at if there's a repeating pattern, something that you think that's maybe not the best. I guess part of it is I feel very against the world right now.
Yeah.
I've really spent a lot of energy to make space for myself in the world, to try to create something that is an extension of myself that hopefully people will be able to enjoy and appreciate and benefit from. And I suppose I feel unsupported by the world, and I think I'm not quite knowing how to handle that. I'm not quite knowing how to relate to people in that way and move forward. And and improve my relationship to the world and make a space for myself without it feeling like, I'm up against the wall fighting with my sword. And I think that's probably kind of how I feel at the moment,
Yeah.
in that space of defensiveness, Like I've spent so much time carving out this tiny little piece of land, and I don't want anybody to take it back.
Yes.
And it's hard.
I think it's important to acknowledge to always be aware of how lonely we feel, and to be aware of the loneliness that is present in the world, in ourselves and in others. I don't think that it's healthy to be obsessed with it. Of course, if it's a chronic feeling, it's important to acknowledge that and to take steps to connect and to become more connected. But I think it's always important to acknowledge that feeling and not try to transcend that feeling by going straight to, I'm connected with the universe, I'm connected to the angels, and I'm connected to yada yada. It's important to connect with other people and with physical people, and I want to acknowledge how hard it is for most people to feel like someone would be willing to connect to them on a real level,
And I think
because of
this experience of I'm fighting against the world, I think I've needed that to feel my own worth, in a sense, to rebuild my self-concept, as it were, my ego. And I think the more I'm doing it and the more I'm realizing how important it is to build a life that's based upon relationships with others.
Yes.
I think it's naturally sort of shifting, and I suppose maybe the complaining is a byproduct of not being quite in that other state where I've moved beyond just my own tiny little island, and I'm moving to that space of building a life that is heavily woven in between the people around me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I have an intuition.
Go for it.
You keep complaining, apart from it being a cultural English thing that you've learned. Of course, there's a deep pain under it. And I've got a feeling that you are not even able to get to that pain because you're not yet in a safe environment to be so.
Ooh.
But if you scratch that pain that is under the complaining, you create more and more space for that pain, and the universe will be like, we want to integrate this pain. Let's move Harry to a place where he can integrate this pain.
Well, I tell you what I felt past couple of days, which definitely has been an experience of pain, is I felt very vulnerable. And that's very strange for me historically. It's because I have built my walls very, very strongly. At points, I've found myself to be one of the most walled people I knew, despite the contradictory fact that I can seem to be very open. But it's like there's a segmentation, if that makes sense. And I feeling very small and feeling very vulnerable. And it's almost this sort of feeling of like, it's embarrassing, like having needs and needing support and needing help. And it's embarrassing, and it felt almost shameful, this feeling like I need all these things. And yet people totally disrespect it and totally don't see it. It's very sad,
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think it's a good thing. You know, it doesn't feel good, but I think it's a big progress.
Yeah, and I think it's also a core wound for a lot of men as well, because men have really been hurt, and what's so sad, I think, I find about the culture for men at the moment is, in the past, men were able to be men in the way that they were able to be forward moving in the world. They had to go out and do things, and just, utilize that masculine energy. But the problem was that they weren't allowed to be vulnerable. They weren't allowed to be open. And then the whole feminist thing came along, and I think muddled up the messages a little bit and actually tried to stop men from being men, which I think is, I think, though the idea is, and though feminists will say, no, we just want women to be able to be women, I think really the way it plays out is they want men to stop being men.
Yes, definitely.
And so then men are in this place right now where we actually haven't had the space for vulnerability made, and we also have had the respect for men being men taken away.
So I think it's a two-way street in a certain way. Can I have a little rant for a moment?
Yes, sure.
Okay, so the other day was International Women's Rights Day. And I've seen this kind of like, instead of protect your daughters, educate your sons. And I'm like, oh my fucking God. Men naturally want to protect women. And also we live in a dangerous world. We live in a dangerous world when it's not just violence of men against women. We all need protection. When you say educate your sons, you really mean castrate them.
Yes.
Stop being a man, stop protecting, and stop being forward moving.
Yeah.
And even like in that kind of castrating men, there's really been actually a push for men to be more vulnerable, or men can be soft too, men can be vulnerable too. In certain more enlightened circles of feminism, you can hear that too. The problem with that is that you are eliminating the masculine energy of protection, of containment, of forward movement, and taking vulnerability instead, when men can be vulnerable only in certain specific situations. It's not healthy for men to always be vulnerable. Of course, we were talking about you moving through your hurt wall and healing and so on, and you're a very conscious person. But a man that is always vulnerable is not attractive. It's not a man. It just attracts women that feel deeply unsafe, and that feel safe with,
That's nice,
with
actually.
a weak man.
Because, I felt that instinctively, and yet at the same time, I hadn't put it as clearly as that, as men don't need to be vulnerable all the time. Like, that actually doesn't serve them. That doesn't make them happy. And that's right. That's so right. I love that feeling of that impenetrable confidence that I can have a lot of the time, which is, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's containment. That's containment. That's masculine energy.
And then that's the thing that I'm realizing, is because I tried to be vulnerable in the past, but it didn't work until I integrated my masculinity. And I've got to a place where I feel fucking masculine, to be honest. And yet I'm like, okay, but how do I integrate this other side, which is like this wound of smallness and neglect and being overlooked and being hurt when my shields are down. And it's very different when you're at that stage before you've reclaimed your masculinity and you're vulnerable. It's kind of almost like this leaking energy.
Yeah.
And
lack of containment, lack of definition.
Yeah, exactly. Now
You're
I
like
have
a
that
box
definition.
with holes.
Yeah, now I have that definition. I'm like, okay, but I don't actually know how to incorporate the two. I don't actually know how to work with those two. And I'm confused, to be honest. I haven't tested it out myself. And I'm happy to say that I've got here that I actually have the masculine side down, and I'm really, really happy with that. But now I'm confused. I'm just like, how do I work with these two things?
I feel like it would benefit you to find a woman or a feminine figure with which you can be vulnerable with no consequences. Not as much as a woman like containing you. That's not the point. More like a woman being receiving of your vulnerability. A woman that can be in that feminine state and receive your vulnerability. I feel that will be very healing for you.
Yeah, I think that's maybe, personal reasons, but that's maybe why I've been feeling quite so vulnerable in the past couple of days. It's because I actually had a little bit of that, and then things blew up, and I was like, oh, okay, that kind of sucks. I'm feeling kind of raw and shieldless in a way, which is, And I think what also makes me sad is this whole culture of, I don't know, hyper moralisticness in a way that is totally arbitrary, where everything has to be the same. Everyone is the same, except it's not. Except the underlying instincts are totally not suggesting that. The underlying instincts are all sorts of crazy, weird power moves. And it feels very scary as a man in that culture. Like, I want to be able to open up and to have time to open up my vulnerability and to be able to have that need met. And I look around to myself and I'm fucking petrified because I'm just like, this is insane. This is the fever dream of a sad, dejected people, That's how I feel about this culture. The political culture, that kind of stuff. It's tragic to me. And that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to create this documentary about the witches of Yorkshire. I might call it The Witches of Yorkshire and Other Wise Spiritual Women, because it's not just about witches per se. It's about that whole culture of spirituality and stuff. And because I think there is such a femininity in that stuff, in the real places, that I actually really respect. And I think in these sorts of communities, there is a lot more genuine femininity than in most other places.
Yes.
Because it has that inner connection. There's that quietness. There's that depth, which I think is really a part of femininity. Even when I relate to my own unconscious, which is supposed to be something which is, the depth of you and stuff, I'm extracting things out of it. And so I'm turning this unconscious stuff into very masculine things. I extract out symbols and ideas and sensations and stuff. But I think the feminine has a lot more of a sensory direct relationship with that unconscious that is powerful in a different way. And it might
I was thinking about how it
to be
do not
articulated,
relate.
but yeah. Yeah.
I do not relate with extracting things and so on, because while you were talking, I was like, where's the actual experience of it? Like,
Yes.
how do you experience? What kind of sensations do you have? You know?
And I have those sensations, but they are in service of what I extract from it, you know. And as a man, you're interested in the boundaries, you're interested in how things fit together, in the symbols. And I think as a woman, truly the heart of a woman is, it wants to feel the texture,
Yes.
wants to experience it.
Yes.
And I think for so long I thought that I had to be like that, because spirituality talks about that, and I had influences in my youth where they domineering female figures that did teach me some great things, but then also imparted certain, you know, not so great things, especially about my own masculinity. And then with the impact of spirituality, is I thought, like, oh, I should just learn how to enjoy life and soak in the moment and yada yada yada. And I'm just like, the further I develop myself, like my own masculinity, the more preposterous that seems. Mm-hmm. I go out and I work every day, and I love it. And I love there, and I'm processing information, and I'm writing things up, and I'm connecting to people, and I'm talking to people, and I'm systemizing, and I'm creating symbols, and I'm synthesizing information, and I'm doing all this stuff, and I fucking love it. I'm so happy. And I could never be happy just sit and soak in the sun. Oh, Jesus. It's just...
You know, yeah. It depends from person per person. You know, I think it's a natural masculine quality, but I'm thinking how I am living my life now. You know, the more discipline I have, the more I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do this and then that, and then I go out and I journal, and perhaps I study something, and perhaps I write stuff. You know, it's not as like working and creating and so on as it would be for you. You know, it's more like, okay, what I feel like doing now, maybe, but having control over one's life when it's actual control, like you're actually in control of your life, you have power of what you do with your time, and you have power of yourself. It's important for all human beings. You know, it's a goal that should be shared by everyone. Of course, everyone's in a different phase. Maybe you need to be more dependent on someone. Maybe you need to have some needs from developmental traumas that were met, you know.
And I think that's the trouble,
But the goal is to be more in control.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the troubles about talking about men and women is I think there generally are fundamental differences, but at the same time, the individual has so much more variation.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
And I think it's important to find your own flow. And find what is, you know, and as we both know, we both genders contain masculine and feminine qualities, or yin and yang qualities. I prefer saying it as that because it kind of takes the charge out of it in that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's nice. It's strange actually getting down to connecting to my own instincts and building a life from what feels genuinely aligned with me, which takes work in this culture, because the ideas can mess up our clarity and clarity of self comprehension, if that makes sense. and so it's not as easy as like, oh, I just do what I feel like, kind of, because there's so much more complicated stuff going on internally.
No, of course.
But the more I align my life to myself, the more I'm like, whoa, this is simple, and I don't know, all the information I've been told, all the theories in my head are all collapsing because I know myself.
Yeah.
It's such a great feeling, and that should be the state. That should be the state that you aim for in any form of spirituality or any form of anything. Is all of the theories collapse because you just know yourself.
Yes, which makes me think about what I was talking in the beginning about Buddha and him being able to do all of the stuff that he was able to do because he was a prince. I think that the kind of a lesson that I want to give to people through that kind of story is that in order to know what's the next step of progression, you have to be deeply aware of where you are and to become deeply aware of the point at which you are. Because if you don't know where you are, you can't know how to get to a certain place. Let's say you're in a forest and you want to go to a certain city. If you don't know exactly where you are in the forest, exactly oriented towards the city, what's the direction of the city, how can you get to it? How can you get to a point that you want to get if you don't know yourself at all? If you can listen to people all the time, you can watch videos, you can read books, you can scroll the internet for spiritual stuff all the time, and you can even listen to this podcast and consume it as much as you want it and enjoy it, of course, enjoy it as much as you want. But if you don't know where you stand, if you don't know the position that you are in right now, you cannot become conscious of what is the next natural step for me to grow in. Because if you try to become the version of yourself that you have in your mind, which is probably your destination, if you are intuitive enough, that's probably your destination. But if you don't know how to get there and what are the steps to get there, you're just getting lost.
Yeah.
You're just getting lost. So my heartfelt invitation for everyone is to really take a look at yourself, understand yourself, feel your feelings, look at your core beliefs, do whatever is beneficial. Ask a friend, ask a genuine, aware friend, not a serpent in your life. Ask people, what do they think of you? Get as much awareness as you can of yourself. Get as much mirroring as you can of yourself. Get to know yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror, like literally look at yourself in the mirror. And that's the key. That's really the key to getting to anywhere in life. To have success in life, you have to know what you're passionate about. To have success in life, you have to know what you're good about. And if you don't know yourself, how can you know what you're good at?
And I would emphasize upon this about instincts. And it's always a very confusing thing, because when we hear instincts, it's like, yeah. And the problem with instincts is it's deep and it's real, and it's also hard to pin down. We all know what it is, but at the same time, it's difficult to pin down. But when you feel the way your energy goes, when you feel the way that, say, you meet somebody, how your deep guttural energy responds, whether you like or dislike or fear or whatever, or disgust, and we have this source of energy within us that is so for us, and it's so primal, and it communicates to us through emotion.
Yes.
And really looking, where is that driving us? And it can get caught, and it can get mixed up, and it can get twisted in your psychology and stuff. But that that instinct within you is like a drive, and it communicates through that emotion, and you'll know when you're moving in the right direction because you feel clear and you feel unimpeded, and you enjoy it. You know, it's clear, it's focused, and get down to the instinct, people. But that's a whole other conversation for a whole other time.
All right.
All right. I think we wrap it up here. I think that was a lovely conversation.
Absolutely. Do we want to like update people on when are they gonna hear from me again?
When are they gonna hear from you? They're gonna hear from you when we record another thing and we release it. So my intention was to fulfill my promise of doing 9 fungi channelings. Even though I have some apprehension about posting more stuff about channeling, as I've matured, as I've grown, I'm seeing how the tool of channeling has got pros and cons, and it's something to be careful with. But nevertheless, I made a promise, and I shall fulfill that promise.
You not only made a promise to people, you made a promise to the consciousness of fungi. So.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Every time you eat a mushroom, they're reminding you of that promise.
yeah, exactly. So that will happen, but not sure exactly when we will record it. When we record it,
it will happen.
It will happen. And is there anything you want to plug, Amelia? Anything you want to share?
So I think it's going to be very interesting for people to hear about our relationship. Like now we've talked about deep stuff, and we've talked about spirituality and our views on that, and we're very aligned with each other on this kind of stuff, and it's interesting to have a conversation. But I think it would be really interesting for people to hear about like our relationship. We were boyfriend and girlfriend. We have an amazing. Harry's my best friend. Like, I mean, to be honest. So, like, how did we get here? And talking a little bit about like conscious uncoupling. I think it's very interesting, and it deeps down into the into relationships, and it allows us to talk about relationships, which is so interesting. I love it.
Yeah, and we can also talk about the variation of how not all conscious uncoupling will uncouple and maintain a friendship.
Yeah, definitely.
It just depends how and who, and you know.
Of course. There's so many variables.
Absolutely. All right, is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I had a really good time.
Oh, hell yeah.
I'm so glad I could talk about deep stuff and my knowledge of anthropology and history.
I feel
and
that you're going to be back on the podcast a lot.
All right.
Yeah, a regular.
Yay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Right. It's been a pleasure. All right.
Bye.
Woodoo, 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 woodoo. Woodoo, 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 woodoo.